Welcome back. We're going to do the disturbing, controversial video game Iceberg by Wendigoon. I'm a Wendigoon sim. You probably are too if you're watching this. If you haven't, look at this man. He's very luscious and has a glorious beard. It's an hour long, so get yourself a cup of whatever the fuck you want to drink and let's go.
Hello everybody. Today we are going to be talking about the disturbing and controversial video game Iceberg.
Hell
It's
yeah.
been a while since I've covered an Iceberg, and since a lot of people have seen my video on the disturbing movie Iceberg,
damn it.
I figured
Okay.
that the disturbing video game Iceberg was quite fitting. Now I put together this Iceberg myself, as well as freeing the animals that she plans to slaughter to make more fur.
Look at her ass. Look at that ass. Holy
Coast.
shit.
I mean, look at this. This is incredible. How can you not love it? While a lot of these games have some blood that is purposefully dramatic to get their point across, the real controversial element to the games is the fact that they exist in order to push their agenda.
Sure.
Which, if you agree with that agenda or not, is totally up to you.
He does some really fucked up shit though. So like, while I agree with the amount of animal, like I don't agree, like it's how animals are treated. But beyond all that, PETA is such a fucking trash organization. But that's a
I just
whole
found out
different
that
video.
PETA makes all these weird video games, and I had to tell you about it.
Yeah.
LSD Dream Emulator.
I played
yes,
that.
that is its real title.
PlayStation,
Made
yep.
by Osamu Sato in 1998.
100%
Now, LSD Dream Emulator is outright a form of interpretive art. It doesn't try to be a standard video game. As a matter of fact, Osamu stated multiple times that he made this for people who do not enjoy or can't play standard video games. So LSD Dream Emulator was made for the PlayStation as a sort of art exhibit. The only real feature the game
like
gives you
shit
besides
like
the start
that.
menu is a map that allows you to see what section of the dream you are currently located in, with the only objective, if you could even call it that, being to travel from one location to the other and simply experience the world you're in. Osamu built the landscapes based on inspirations he had from his own lucid dreams, as well as dream journals from those he knew. Because of
Lucid
this,
dreams?
several people who see the game
Sure.
says that it gives them an intense feeling of familiarity, despite the incredibly alien format most of these worlds exist in. Given the drastic contrast between elements of the world that are known and elements that are
This
staunchly
looks like
unknown, many believe LSD Dream Emulator to be the first piece of media that really captured the horror of liminal spaces.
It looks more like a
And while I find this
DMT
horror fascinating, as it kind of exists as
emulator.
the grandfather to concepts of things like the back rooms as we know them today, I also think this game is absolutely hilarious because it was made for the PlayStation 1, and while it never really saw distribution in the United States, it did see
I've
some
played
level
it.
of attention in Japan. So there was probably
Emulated, of course,
a young
but-
child who turned on his PlayStation to play Crash Bandicoot or some jet ski game or whatever, and turned on this and was never the same person again. Night Trap was made in
He's right.
1992.
Night Trap,
for the
everyone
Sega
knows Night
CD.
Trap.
The game featured FMV cutscenes, which
How
again was
many-
very popular at the time.
God damn it. How many of you actually had a Sega CD? I did. I had the fucking monstrosity, was the Gen 1 Sega Genesis, the rectangular one, not, I think that was Gen 1, the first generation. And it had the Sega CD on the side. Some of them had the Sega CD on bottom, but there were like two models. There was like the CDX as well, but I won't talk about that. There was that, and then I had the 32X, and then I had some Sega CD 32X games because I thought, oh my god, it uses everything. It must be the best fucking system in the world. Goddamn thing looked like a fucking transformer, and it took like 47 outlets to plug in. But Sega CD did have Night Trap and Sonic. 32X, shit on it all you want. It has Knuckles Chaotix, which is home to one of my favorite musical video game songs ever. Door into Summer. Go check it out. I have SoundCloud. Shameless plug.
not so much nowadays. In the game, you, the player, are eavesdropping on a girl's slumber party that is being attacked by vampires.
This shit
to
would
protect
never
them,
get made
you have
today.
to move to the viewpoints of different
Ever.
cameras within the house and set off things like traps
It's like
in order
Five
to
Nights
stop
at
the girls
Freddy's.
from being harmed. While I think this is a really cool idea, especially for the time, I can tell you that the plot or the acting is nothing to write home about. What made this game
Lies.
so controversial is that if you
Lies.
failed, your game over screen would typically be the death of one of the girls. Well, I mean, nothing to us cool kids that, grew up on Live Leak or whatever. This was a
Leak,
problem
yeah.
for a lot of parents at the time because in
God.
1992, there was no rating system for video games. So at the 1993
The
committee
glory
hearing
days.
where they had the whole discussion of how video games should be regulated and what their rating system should be, Night Trap was brought up alongside titles like Mortal Kombat.
Right.
And a lot of people attribute the
That's a big thing.
B-movie-esque killings of Night Trap to the reason that you can't buy an M-rated game without your parents' permission.
You know what's so fucking weird about all this now is that Nintendo has legitimate hentai games on it and PlayStation is censoring their games. Like, what? Fuck it. Like, when did I drop into Bizarro World? I think probably in the 2016 election. That's when we made the shift over into whatever the fuck world we're living in today.
Again, not that disturbing by today's standards, or for adults at all really, but an important footnote in the history of disturbing media. The first entry of Postal, which was developed by Running with Scissors, was released in 1997. While there have been 4 entries in the series, Postal 2 is the one everyone remembers.
Yep.
The game allows players to go on mundane daily tasks, or cause a whole lot of havoc. If I had to describe Postal to someone who wasn't familiar with it, I would describe it as what boomers think GTA is. You know how you always hear on the news, they're like, oh, in GTA, the goal of the game is to run people over and then shoot them with guns and light them on fire. And it's like, sure, you can do that, but that's not really like, what the game's about.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that 100%, but I understand what he's saying.
In Postal, that is absolutely what the game is about. It's very satirical and very over the top in its presentation, but graphic nonetheless. Sure, a lot of games will let you set someone on fire or shoot them, but in Postal, you can pee on their corpse. Which is really what it's all about.
That is
it's graphic
true,
and over the top because that's exactly what it sets out to be. And while we're on the topic of games that made the news lose their mind for a couple months whenever it came out, let's talk about Manhunt. Manhunt was developed by Rockstar North, and the first game came out in 2003.
I've never played that.
With a sequel coming out in 2007. In Manhunt,
it was like on the Xbox 360, right? The second one?
I'm not kidding. As he is forced to
James Earl
participate
Cash.
in multiple snuff films. Most notably in the game, whenever a player performs an execution kill, the camera cuts to a grimy handheld camcorder that would likely be seen in a snuff film production. The game didn't garner that much attention from mainstream media when it first came out. It was the next year in 2004 when a 14-year-old boy was murdered in the UK, and the media began to blame the killing on the game Manhunt. The news around this time had a field day talking about how the killer was motivated by the game and he would play the game over and over again, and it's because of the game he decided to murder this child. But the only quote I could find that ever referenced Manhunt at all was the parents of the victim said regarding the killer, I think his friends mentioned that he played it, which is pretty much just a speculation. Because of that, Manhunt hit the news cycle and became the next subject for the whole "Are video games bad for kids?" debate. So in response, in 2007, Manhunt 2 was way worse than Manhunt 1. Whereas Manhunt 1 had a story and it was just a particularly brutal story meant for adults, Manhunt 2 relished much more in the brutality of it because that was the thing that got the game popular. So people ragged on the game for being disturbing, and Rockstar North turned the dial up to 11.
Oh yeah, you want to see disturbing?
On to Tier 2, these are mostly games that are still kind of edgy or bizarre, just more so. Ugetsu Katan was made by the Tonkin House.
Let me go back just have a second. Hatred. I think I was about to talk about that, but it seems like he does have that on here. What do we have now? Ugetsu Katan. I don't know what that is. Roly Polies. That sounds familiar. I don't know. Left Behind. It's like Christian game or whatever. No Nanakorobi Yauki. Don't know what that is. Eternal Forces. No, I was talking about Eternal Darkness. I don't know if I know what that is. And Hatred. Hatred's a big one. Hatred's a pretty fucking big game, especially one that's pretty popular that made this list.
Edgy or bizarre, just more so. Ugetsu Katan was made by the Tonkin House in 1996. I'm sure I pronounced none of that right, but we're just going to keep going. The game involves you playing as a character who recently attempted suicide, or possibly succeeded in it, but then a ghost brought you back, but then you're alive at the end. But it's a Japanese game. It's weird. The reason it's on this list is because of various sections in the game. The ghost takes you down these very strange and, like I said, Japanese settings, with each set piece being the story of a different individual who took their own life, or just in general monsters of the afterlife. While this is bizarre in its own right, where the game gets interesting is that given its themes of suicide, there are several who believe that several of the faces depicted within the game are of suicide victims. Now, of course, this isn't confirmed anywhere.
I think it's just fucking dumb that you can't say suicide.
But given the bizarre nature of the game
itself, I'm gonna say it.
You can see why. Hatred was created by Destructive Creations in 2015. Yep. In the Hatred, you play as a guy who has decided that humanity is awful and then goes on a rampage. The game is just you slaughtering as many people you can with as many executions and different weapons as possible. The ending of the game has your character making it to a nuclear facility where he blows up the facility in order to cause the maximum casualties. The game received so much backlash on its release that it was temporarily taken down from Steam. Or more specifically, it was pulled from Steam's Greenlight program. However, eventually, it was put back up. Now here's what's interesting. There's a story that Gabe Newell, the Valve founder who all the memes are made about, apologized for the game and then had it taken down. When it seems in actuality, he apologized to the dev team of Hatred for taking the game down in the first place, citing freedom of expression and whatnot. And because of the controversy and how much attention getting taken off Greenlight garnered, Hatred got so much support that it eventually came out in full. And
like, it's a mediocre game at best. And it's like what is the difference between this and movies? What, you're controlling it? Like, fuck off with that. It's still the same, like, impact that you're getting in your mind. It's so fucking dumb. Just let the game come out. It's not even anything.
And after this game that everyone was clamoring for finally came out, they universally decided that it was mid. Which, yeah, the selling point of the game is the brutality.
But, like, okay, so is it really out of the realm of possibility that, like, some kid would curb stomp another kid's head and possibly kill him because he played Mario and you jump on people's heads? Like, is it that outlandish to think that could happen? What are you gonna do, blame Mario? Like, fuck off with all of that. Sorry, it's really annoying.
And absurdism of it all. Not, great controls or story. I'm not even going to pretend I'm pronouncing this one correctly. Roly Polies no Nana Korobi Yoki. Yeah, Nana Korobi Yoki? Sure. Translated, the title means Roly Polies falling down 7 times and getting up 8, which is a saying in Japan, to my understanding. This game was released in 1997
God damn,
and made by Osamu
Fuel.
Sato,
Look at
the
that
same
pig.
guy who did the LSD Dream emulator.
Holy shit. All of that is Nightmare Fuel, but that peacock? It's a pretty fucking cool looking peacock. There aren't enough peacocks in video games.
Game, which when you look at the two side by side, you can probably guess that. Roly Polies was supposed to be a game to help young children learn new languages. However, instead, it became a game to help young children develop new nightmares. Because these are some of the most terrifying character models I have ever seen. It's also in that weird, uncanny age of early CGI, so
Oh my god, y'all remember Reboot? Anyone? Reboot? That's a fucking banger of a show.
That doesn't help. But what's so interesting and also disturbing about this game is while you've probably seen a lot of games or videos in this aesthetic, the whole, mascot horror or creepy games for
that's
kids
so fucking
idea,
dope.
this does it all natural. It was a game for children that just so happened to accidentally be nightmare fuel. And while the game is a cult hit, as you can imagine, it didn't sell well at the time because people thought it was terrifying.
I love it.
I also think it's
about
kind of hilarious how the artist who did LSD Dream Emulator, and we can understand the idea of kind of out there or, heady art pieces that are kind of disturbing and scary, but weirdly comforting in a different sense. Like, we can process that. But that guy took that same mindset and was like, if we bend the shapes and colors we built here into this, they can teach children the alphabet. For our last one on tier 2, we have by far my favorite on tier 2, Left Behind Eternal Forces. Left Behind Eternal Forces is a Christian real-time strategy game.
Okay. It was Left Behind Eternal Forces. I thought Left Behind was this game. I forgot that it had the subtitle of Eternal Forces. That's what I was saying. I know Eternal Darkness, but I've never heard of Eternal Forces. And okay, fair enough.
Based off of the Left Behind book series. It was made by Inspired Media Entertainment in 2006 and places the Tribulation Force against the global community peacekeepers. The Tribulation Force being the remnant of the Christians left after the rapture, and the global community peacekeepers being a part of the New World Order. In the single-player mode, you play as the Tribulation Force as you try to battle against the New World Order while also converting people to Christianity. You also need to manage your resources for the survivors at your base camp, and also keep your men in the field supplied so that...
Wait, how are you... Maybe I don't remember all of Revelation, but... Like, aren't you left behind if you're not Christian? Or haven't repented or whatever? So, like, if you turn people Christian during that time, the fucking trials and tribulations time, does it even matter? Like, I don't know. I'm rusty on my biblical lore.
But they can get new converts. While you do have weapons, you want to use them sparingly and only when you have to, because killing people lowers your spirit level and causes more people to defect and choose not to convert. In the multiplayer mode, you play against other players as either, again, the Tribulation Force or the New World Order. And to all that, I ask, who was this game for? Because, well, the obvious answer you may think is, oh, well, it's for Christians who are really into RTS games, I guess. But no, it's not. Because it's like making a weird mockery of it. The idea that there's like a point system for how many converts you have, and that there's a spirit level that takes you further from God.
I love it. I love everything about it.
And it's definitely not for non-super Christians, because who's going to pick up a game called Left Behind otherwise? The game had several critics on either side of the aisle.
No, it is definitely played. I fucking guarantee you this game is played by the majority of atheists in this sort of retro computer game realm. Guaranteed. Fuck, I need to go find it and play it one night.
Again, people who were not Christian thought the concept was ridiculous, and people who were thought it was a mockery.
It is
especially
ridiculous.
Because in the online
That's
mode,
why
you
you
can
play
effectively play as the Antichrist. And eventually, the game faded into obscurity. One of the funniest stories I found around this game is they planned to include this in a care package program for American soldiers in the Middle East. But after all this public backlash started, they decided against it. So there was a chance for a while that there were going to be soldiers on their mid-2000s computers in the middle of Iraq playing as the Antichrist to mow down their friend who's converting people to Christianity.
Fuck yeah.
Do with that what you will.
How is that not the best fucking game ever created?
With that, we are on to Tier 3. And within Tier 3, we're going to look at more real-world disturbing factors.
3030. Okay, have I heard any of these? Quest for Bush, I think? That's where you play as Al-Qaeda and want to like kill, at that time, President Bush. Kanye Quest 3030, that sounds amazing. I've never heard of it. Hong Kong 97. That's that weird fucking shooter game, I think. If I'm thinking of the right game. Station.exe, I feel like I've heard it, but I don't know really what it is. And Quest for Saddam. Probably like the companion game to Quest for Bush, if I had to take a shot. I think. Maybe I could be misremembering.
As well as
though.
games that, again,
Getting
push
into
the
some
envelope in
weird
a political
shit.
or media sense. Starting with our first entry, Hong Kong 97, which was developed by Happysoft in 1995.
Yep.
Hong Kong 97 is a
game's
satirical
amazing.
game about what might happen if the people of China invade the land of Hong Kong. The setting of the gameplay being, and I'm not kidding, Bruce Lee's relative shows up in Hong Kong to kill every Chinese person in the world. So it's very ridiculous, over the top, and made for a laugh. Except, if the player dies, on the game over screen, there is a photo of what appears to be a real dead body. Now, this was a huge question for a long time. Why on earth does this random parody game have just a dead body for seemingly no reason? But thanks to Gooseboos on YouTube, which I'll link his video in the description, it turns out this was in fact a real dead body. Wow. It comes from the documentary Death Files, which I talked about in the disturbing movie Iceberg. And it turns out the corpse shown in the game over screen is the corpse of a man who was killed in the Bosnian Civil War. And it's presented so unceremoniously, I can only imagine the creator of Hong Kong 97 just didn't really think about it. They're like, oh, well, your character dies, so we'll show a dead guy. Which is really sad, if you think about it. Kanye Quest 3030 is a turn-based RPG that centers around a fictional story regarding Kanye West. The game is about Kanye West going to the year 3030 to fight all of these different rappers and artists in the future. The game itself is just lighthearted and fun.
It's it has RPG
things
Maker
like
game, right?
lyrical references and song titles to use as weapons or defense in battle. And on the surface, the game just seems to be an easygoing RPG title.
Yeah, I think I have heard of that one. I'm fairly certain I have.
It is, until you dig a little deeper. Nexpo made a great video about all of this, which I will link in the description, but the short version is that many believe Kanye Quest 3030 to be the hub of a cult known as Ascensionism. Several ciphers and codes that are found within the game lead people to believe that it is either a recruitment tool for the cult or it is used by a hub for cult members. Wow. Eventually, people found enough information to contact developers of the game who supposedly were a part of this cult, and several of these supposed cult members asked users to send in things like their full name, address, and images of themselves. Now, later on into the Iceberg, we're going to get into a lot of what I believe to be real scary, cult activities and video game stuff. Or at least things that I think have more potential to be legitimate. I wonder if he's going to talk about the Gemini Home Entertainment. I'm pretty sure all of the ciphers and codes and whatnot are done to just drive attention towards the game, and they're kind of building a sort of ARG. But it is real that they ask people for pictures of themselves and names and whatnot, and that is always scary online. Never do that, ever. Yeah, even if you do want to join a cult. If they're a good cult, they'll already have pictures of you. They should have done their homework. And on the note of things that are probably fake, but I'm going to talk about them anyway because it'd be a lot cooler if they were real, we have Station.exe.
I don't know what
Station.exe was a comedically simplistic game that was uploaded to 4chan. The poster said that the disc was for sale at a local venue, and there was no information about it. When loading into the game, we see that it is as simplistic as a design for this quote-unquote station could possibly be. The player just walks from room to room, seeing a few things that appear to be generators, and I guess grass around the facility itself with a bridge leading away from it. However, after a few minutes of walking around, really strange noises start to play, and then these giant floating polygon heads begin to follow the player. When they make contact with the player, they do damage, and upon dying, the game crashes. One player noticed that on the outside wall of one of the buildings were coordinates. When typing in those coordinates, we can see that it takes you to a location in Siberia. This Siberian station is an abandoned diamond mine that has a striking resemblance to the structure within Station
Wow,
.exe. Now, this abandoned diamond mine
damn.
is in a prohibited area of Siberia, so no one's able to go up and check out the location for themselves. And to that effect, why on earth does this game have a potentially one-for-one recreation of an abandoned station building at a diamond mine in the middle of Siberia?
Weird. Yeah.
Digging into the game's files, there were
It is very
connections
weird.
to old messages that were left on the weapons board of 4chan, but that probably makes sense because if the game was made as a sort of hoax, then there were archived posts brought in from 4chan to freak out people on 4chan who might see them. So that's all well and good. But why on earth would it just be this random building in the middle of...
Why wouldn't it be that random building, right? It's got to be some kind of building. Every building is equally as likely as any other, I would assume. Well, maybe not, because you have popularity of things. Still, like if you're going for an out-of-the-way building, fuck it, why not?
of the tundra for seemingly no reason. I suppose maybe the person who created the game saw the abandoned building on like Google Earth or something and decided to recreate it in his game to be creepy. But even then, like, what on earth does the giant heads mean and everything else? It's such a
Doesn't mean
strange little
anything.
mystery.
Don't worry
I
about
hope
it.
it's something terrifying. It would make me so happy. Quest for Saddam was made by Petrilla
okay.
Entertainment in 2003. Now, Quest for Saddam was an over-the-top shooter that was a parody of Saddam Hussein and of Middle Eastern militants that just had a bunch of stereotypes and featured the player going through with Doom-esque controls and just shooting everyone they come across, eventually killing Saddam Hussein himself.
Yep.
And while there were a ton of these edgy games, especially in the early 2000s, like Muslim Massacre or Zog's Nightmare, the reason I want to mention Quest for Saddam is because Quest for Saddam got like a weird amount of attention in the news, and not in the way things like Postal or Manhunt did, but like positive attention. Like people saw it and thought it was interesting, and that it was a
Sure.
fun way to interact with the war on terror, I guess. So in response,
You want to have fun interacting with the war on terror, because that's what it's known for, the fun factor.
the global Islamic media front made a counter to Quest for Saddam called Quest for Bush, which was pretty much the exact same
Hell
game,
yeah.
only all of the character models of the Middle Eastern soldiers you kill were switched over to American soldier models, and at the end of the game, instead of killing Saddam, you kill President George Bush. Like, sure, there's
I
been
heard
a
about
ton of
that.
propaganda games that were made by one agency to push one ideology or another or whatever, but it's rare to see one side make a game where you kill the other side's leader, so the other side literally goes,
That's so
no
funny.
you, and decide.
It's like Pokemon Red or Blue, or any of the Pokemon releases. Quest for Saddam or Quest for Bush?
It's to kill the president. To be honest, I don't know if something like that has ever happened again, but it should. That's hilarious. Moving into tier
Yeah,
4,
right.
we're getting into the heavy stuff.
Okay, now we're getting into weird shit. VTech Rampage, I don't know. Super Columbine Massacre RPG, I think I know of, but I've never played. JFK Reloaded, I've never heard of it, but I can pretty sure I can guess what that's about. KZ Manager, don't know. Kanaguti, no. In the story of Kamikuishiki Village, did I say that right? Most of these I don't know, except for the Super Columbine Massacre RPG.
Starting with our first title, Super Columbine Massacre RPG. Super Columbine Massacre RPG was developed by Danny Leedon in 2005. The game is, as it says, an RPG where you play as Eric and Dylan on the day of the Columbine shooting. Eric and Dylan, of course,
fucked up.
being the two shooters of the Columbine Massacre.
With
The
a,
game, as you could imagine, is very brutal. It opens with Eric's mother waking him
Yeah.
up on the day of the shooting, Eric and Dylan making the bombs that they plant at the school, which never actually go off, and then you take control as Eric and Dylan massacre as many people as possible. After the shooting, as in real life, Eric and Dylan take their own lives, and in the game, their bodies are shown along with a montage of news footage and witnesses and statements of victims' families. However, this is only the halfway point of the game,
Really?
as it then goes to Eric and Dylan in hell fighting off demons. And this is not played in a horrific
Oh, God.
or serious tone at all. The two of them remark that this is like Doom, and eventually they make their way to a plaza where they meet various dead historical figures and fictional characters like Oppenheimer,
Really?
or Ronald Reagan.
The fuck? Oppenheimer? I mean, sure, I guess his involvement with Project Manhattan, or the Manhattan Project.
As well as characters like
Crazy.
Pikachu and Mario and
What?
Homer Simpson.
What did Mario do to go to hell? God
And it
damn.
ends with them fighting the South Park version of Satan, and then Satan saying they did a good job in that whole kill spree thing. So it's strange
So
for a
fucking
lot of
terrible.
reasons, but perhaps most strange by the words the creator has said about it. So Danny, the creator of the game, says that the reason he made the game is because when he was in high school, he was bullied a lot in a similar manner to how Eric and Dylan were bullied, and it got to the point that he began to desire to hurt these people who were doing this to him. And it wasn't until Danny watched A Clockwork Orange that he said while watching the movie, he recognized that just because society has placed him in a predicament, it doesn't justify his actions or the evils he would commit in the name of that injustice. So because of that, Danny began going to therapy and got better, but he always sympathized with the position that Eric and Dylan were in. So he claims that he
What?
made Super Columbine Massacre RPG as a purposefully over-the-top statement on how the media and how politicians portraying the Columbine Massacre. There's a lot of talk in the game.
Like, what does he mean, though? Like, he sympathized with the position they were in? What the fuck position were they in that they had to go and murder people? How do you sympathize with that? Like, they planned it out. I mean, nobody forced their hand. They just did it, you know?
About things like gun control and about how their playing video games led to all this. And of course, with the second half of the game taking place in hell, it's clearly satirical, at least to some degree. Now, while that's all well and good for an art project, as you could imagine, the family members of the victims of Columbine weren't
That's
too
pretty fucked
happy
up, yeah.
with, this
100%.
whole art project he had made. So
Art project,
one of
quote
the
unquote.
friends of one of the victims of Columbine ended up doxing the creator, and that's how we know his name's Danny and all, because beforehand he was anonymous until he got doxed, and then after getting doxed, he came forward with all this stuff, effectively saying, "Oh well, it's actually irony or post irony or whatever." But because of those statements, Super Columbine Massacre RPG is held in a weird place of respect by a lot of people who are familiar with these disturbing games. Like every other, I hate that I even have to say this, but every other school shooting simulator or
So
RPG
fucked up.
is compared back to Super Columbine Massacre RPG as it being the golden standard. One of these games being VTech Rampage, which is a
Yeah,
game
never heard
about
of
the
it.
Virginia Tech campus shooting that was
course it
developed
is.
by Ryan Lamburn and came out 3 weeks after the Virginia Tech shooting. In it, you play as the shooter and you follow the same timeline of events he did, from his first 2 victims to going to record a final video and then going on the rampage before taking his own life. Now, the reason I mention that
That was a really fucking horrific thing being in college at that point, which I was. I mean, that was like a really big deal. Now, if it happened, people would forget about it a day later. Sad world we live in.
like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm only trying to keep one game from each category here. The reason I mentioned the VTech Rampage game is because, unlike Danny Ladon, who gave all that stuff about how this was actually an artistic expression of his position and his mindset at the time, the creator of VTech Rampage said he made it, quote, because it's funny. And
the
he
lulz,
put up these
right?
donation goals
Fuck
saying
off.
that if
Fuck
he has
off.
donated $1,000, he will take the game off Newgrounds. If he has donated $2,000, he will take the game off his website. And if he has donated $3,000, he'll say he's sorry. It doesn't matter where
What
you
the
go on the
fuck?
internet or how far down the rabbit hole you've gone. It always gets worse. And speaking of,
Not wrong.
let's get worse
Not
right
wrong.
now. KZ Manager is a Zoo Tycoon type game
Okay.
where the thing that you are managing is a concentration camp.
There it is.
That is right. It is
There
a
it
property
is.
manager video game set in a 1940s concentration camp. The original game was released for the Commodore 64 in 1990 by the Missionaries. Some of the resources you have to manage is prisoners and food to things like public opinion, and things like public opinion will rise with the more people you execute. But if you execute everyone, you don't have workers to raise capital in other areas, etc.
And some
It's had
varying
several
death.
different re-releases over the years, adding things like visual elements. But all versions of the game center around you controlling one of humanity's most brutal genocides.
That's super
And to
fucked
kind of
up.
have a final
Come on
entry,
now.
especially after those last few, that's just bizarreness taken to the extreme. Look no further than the developer Kongudi. Kongudi is, and yeah, I'm sticking with that pronunciation, is a
Kongudi.
game developer who has made some of the most unexplainable, bizarre things I have ever seen, ever. Like, look at some of these titles, such as Merry-Go-Round,
Okay.
Why, Intelligent Rackety Paradise, and The Underground Explorer. Theories for why these games even exist range from everything that it is a sensory overload test to see what you can push your brain to the idea that it is some new way to open up channels of your mind, sort of
Weird.
a visual drug. Some people saying he's just trying to give people seizures. All in all, I am sure that it is unexplainable to anyone but Kongudi. I went to his website to try to
God
make things
damn.
better, and
Talk about a fucking busy background. Holy shit.
it just made them much worse. Almost nothing is known about this anonymous developer, and nothing probably ever will. And I kind of like that there's just one absolutely insane corner of the internet that I can come back to if I ever want to be mortified. The story of Kamikushiki Village was supposedly created by the Aum Shinrikyo cult. Now, in reality, it was developed by Happy Soft Games in 1995, the same people, mind you, who did Hong Kong 97, and the game
I would've
centers
figured
around
that,
the
yeah.
aforementioned Aum Shinrikyo cult.
100%.
Now, this cult may sound familiar to you because they were responsible for the Tokyo sarin gas attacks of 1995. The game goes on a journey through the cult's existence, from their early days to their rise to political power, and eventually the gas
so
attacks
weird.
themselves. What makes the game so disturbing are several of the videos and images are taken from the cult themselves. Everything from the facilities where the gas that would take the lives of several innocents was created, to interviews and videos of the cult in worship. Now, while the game is disturbing in its own right for that reason, as mentioned, one of the main theories around this game is that it was developed by the cult themselves as a sort of recruitment tool. Now,
Sure.
I personally don't believe that because, as anyone who's played the game would
I
know,
think I have
it
heard
depicts the
about
cult
this.
in a pretty
I don't
negative
remember
light.
where, though.
Like, for example, the leader of the cult, Shoko Asahara, was known for selling his bathwater and blood to members of the cult. And the way that's depicted in the game is with this, which is, far from flattering.
Fuck.
However, several
Oh,
theories come
God.
back into play
Weird.
and state
Weird
that
shit.
if the game wasn't made by a cult, it was
Weird
made
shit.
with the help of some cult members. As many of the videos and photos that are seen in the game don't come from any mainstream news or documentary sources that covered the cult's actions. So perhaps elements of this game were put together by disgruntled cult members. Either way, seeing killers portrayed in this kind of comedic light with the knowledge that perhaps these elements were made by people who were complicit with the murders when they happened is disturbing to say the least. And then finally
Sure.
for Tier 4, we
Oh.
have JFK Reloaded.
Put on your
Now, a lot of you
surprise
have probably
faces.
heard of this game if you're familiar with disturbing games online. It was developed by Traffic Games in 2004 and is quite literally a Lee Harvey Oswald simulator. It entirely goes off the basis of the Warren Commission's
I live in Dallas, or around the DFW area.
findings that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and shot Kennedy as he was driving away, and the entire purpose of the game is to recreate that kill shot. As a matter of fact, the
Wow.
developer of the game said that the reason this game was made in the first place was to prove the Warren Commission's findings that Lee Harvey Oswald could have taken all three of those shots, and everything played out in the exact same way the FBI said it did. As a matter of fact, all the language around this game, even given what we're about to talk about in a minute, seems to be weirdly respectful of JFK, and the idea that this whole
I
game
can
was
see
done
that.
as sort of a research tool so that people could
can see that.
understand the logistics of what happened in Dallas that day. When the game
But like, okay, the interesting thing here is, did he make the game according to the Warren report, or to actual like physics? Like, did he get the refire rate, correct, or whatever? The spin of the bullet, the wind that day. I mean, there's a lot of shit like you have to take into account. I'm not saying one way or the other, but yeah, I don't think it's as cut and dry as like, oh, this is how it happened. It's how it could have happened. But I'm not a conspiracist. Conspiracist? Is that a word?
Came out, they put up a prize offering that said, depending on how the game does in sales, a $100,000 prize would be rewarded to whoever can most perfectly recreate Lee Harvey Oswald's shots. And you want to know the funniest thing about it? This entire game that was made to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald could do it. And that surely, if everyone plays a video game enough times, eventually someone's going to recreate it. They were never able to recreate Lee Harvey Oswald shots. They made a simulator to prove that Lee Harvey Oswald was the shooter, and it didn't work. The logistics of how the bullets went and the amount of time to fire and all of that was seen as no way, absurd. And the magic bullet, nope, didn't happen. The closest someone got during that competition was like 60% accuracy out of the 100% scale the game grades on, and he was rewarded about $10,000. But to this day, no one has completed a 100% run of JFK Reloaded. The game also has a lot of comedic elements in it as well. Like, for example, you can set how much everyone freaks out when shots start to fire, and there is a mode where as soon as you...
I'm sorry, it's very disrespectful, but it's fucking funny as shit too.
Fire the gun, everyone starts driving in different directions and crashes into things, and people get thrown everywhere. You don't just have to shoot JFK, you can shoot anyone standing around the area for funsies, I guess. And upon looking in the game files, all of that fake deep stuff about we're here to help the Kennedy family and all that seems to be not true, as they do things like, refer to JFK being hit in the head as the quote money shot. And people like Ted Kennedy and other members of the Kennedy family said they hated it and it was a disgrace and blah blah blah. And when you think about it, aside from like the disrespect to Kennedy and all that, when you think about it, this doesn't sound like someone that really likes the FBI and wants to prove that Oswald did it would do. This sounds like something I would do. Like, I would 100% make a Lee Harvey Oswald simulator where I'm like, yep, I made this to prove that he can do it, no problem. Oh, what's that? It's impossible? Everyone who's tried thousands and hundreds of thousands of times has never been able to recreate what the FBI said happened that day. Oh me, oh my, what a predicament we've gotten ourselves into. What will I ever do? Like, the developers of this were absolutely trolling. All of that, we're here to prove and help out the FBI, was a load of it. And aside from like the whole making fun of the Kennedy stuff, like calling it the money shot or whatever, the elements of like adding a car crash mode to it and making it effectively impossible to validate the FBI in any way, I for one stand for. I think that's hilarious. I love them. I mean, look at the homepage of the game and tell me that this is state sanctioned. All right, tier 5 is going to be quick. I didn't really know where to put these because there's no other topics to talk about them. But if I'm talking...
Rape play. I don't imagine that's a fun game.
About disturbing games, then it's kind of a cop-out to not talk about them. So yeah, let's just get this over with. So first up, we have 177.
I don't know.
177 is the Japanese police code for a rope in progress. And the game 177 is about just that. It was developed in 1986 by DB Soft and has you playing a character who is trying to 177 a woman he's chasing down in the middle of a field. You do this by stripping off pieces of her clothes one by one before you eventually commit the deed in a cutscene. This is not helped by the fact that the game has pretty much no music, so it's just like this incredibly eerie and violent setting that I think is supposed to be comedic, at least from the way the development and the text around it makes it out to be, but it just comes across as incredibly creepy and eerie. Depending on how you did, if you had low points, you lose because you didn't bring pleasure and you're arrested and thrown in jail. But much, much worse, if you win by bringing pleasure, then the victim decides to marry you and you get the good ending. This game was hated by everyone when it came out. The Japanese government had a big fuss about it, and eventually the game was recalled. And on the same note of 177 is a game called Ray Play. I think if I enunciate it that way, YouTube won't catch on. And the game is where you do exactly what it says. You play as a guy who is attempting to a woman and her 2 children, aged 17 and 12. Okay. The gameplay has you stalking each of them individually before you begin to physically assault them, before doing the task. The game was developed by a company called Illusion in 2006 and is one of the most banned countries in the world. Like,
banned countries in the world. Meant to say banned in most countries. That's funny. That's a pretty good slip up. It is the most banned countries in the world.
For real, everything from sections of Europe to Japan itself to Australia, everywhere has this game blacklisted, as you could imagine. Now, the reason that I talk about both of these games, like I said, normally if there's one game that has this encompassing idea, I'm not going to talk about everything else in that category. But I want to talk about these two for different reasons. So 177 is kind of like the idea of all those old games like Custer's Revenge and whatnot, like old, early video games that were, they felt mocking of like a real world tragedy or whatever, a real world evil. But this one weirdly had a lot of people come to its defense, particularly when it started to get banned. What did I say? Particularly.
Speaking is hard, people. Speaking is fucking difficult as shit.
When it started getting banned. Because they would argue that while that is a horrible crime, it's not viewed as badly in society as, say, murder is.
No, it is.
But we have games about murder all the time. Why do they not get banned, but this one does? Two different stories that effectively show the depravity that developers can reach when they run with the idea of seeing what they can get away with. Tier 6 is going to be...
That is a weird thing, though. Like, you can't get away with, like... That's an interesting line of thinking. Because they said rape wasn't as bad as murder. I guess you could say it's actually much worse. So that's why you can't get away from it. I don't think it's what they said, like not as bad as murder. I think it's much worse than murder because the person usually, you know, if they live, they're fucking scarred for life. You know, that's not something you can fix. So yeah, worse than murder. I'll go with that.
Be some of the more interesting urban legends or disturbing stories that revolve around pre-existing
I've never heard of any of these.
Worlds.com premiered in April of 1995 and was one of the first 3D meet and greet chat games. And considering it came out in 1995, Worlds.com is quite impressive. It featured a lot of things that would become standard for internet interactions into the future, with things like player-controlled avatars or different meeting rooms and sections within Worlds.com itself. When the game came out, it got attention from people like Steven Spielberg and David Bowie. It was a huge deal. However, over the years, the tech became antiquated and people lost interest. So why is it on this list? Well, effectively, Worlds.com was this online game where players could interact and talk to each other, but now there were no players. So something more sinister began to fill in the gaps. Now there's a lot of stories.
Wait, what did he say? I was thinking it's very much like a VR chat, right? God, I need to play that. I need to fucking put on my goddamn Oculus again. See if I can't get it to fit.
What's it on this list? Well, effectively, Worlds.com was this online game where players could interact and talk to each other, but now there were no players. So something more sinister began to fill in the gaps. Now there's a lot of stories with Worlds.com involving legends of a cult presiding within the video game. Things like a person named Nexialis, which will appear before the player and then lead them into these dark, disturbing rooms before they message them videos and audio clips of like animals being slaughtered. And that's all disturbing in its own right. The idea that there's just a guy trolling around in the game that will just throw that stuff at you when you least expect it. But there's also evidence that supports the idea that Nexialist is just a troll who's doing it for fun and leading people into, rooms with goat heads and Satan pictures does seem like a troll. But what is creepy is how the game has become a hub for a sort of cyber stalking. There are people within the game, like Jimbly, who ask for your photograph and information so that he can then take it and plaster it all over the walls within the custom player created worlds inside of the game. And while some of these are
Yeah, I've heard a lot of things do that, like population will die, and from what I know, like pedos will take it over, or like whoever. Like, it's real fucking weird.
treated in jest as a sort of gang initiation for fun within this dead MMO, some of these are nude images of participants that had been stolen from their personal information, or people posing or in spite stealing pictures from other people and then plastering them in the worlds as well. I mean, imagine if you knew that a compromising picture of yourself was just on the wall in this abandoned video game. That combined with allegations of spyware and people in the game convincing other people to give them personal data.
God damn, that is fucking... Who is fucked up enough to do this?
So that they can follow them in real life. While I don't think there's a cult in Worlds.com, there's definitely a stalking ring. Or at least I should say there was, because in recent years, Worlds.com has become a sort of crypto, NFT, VR, whatever thing, which is a cult in its own right, and in my opinion, much more terrifying. Similar in horror.
It's like the pre-alpha metaverse that Mark Zuckerberg's losing like billions in. Didn't work then, doesn't work now.
To Worlds.com, we have lostboy.exe. Lostboy.exe originally made its way onto the message boards of 4chan. Upon loading the game, the player was dropped into a creepy sort of backrooms-esque maze where strange music would play and images of Satan could be seen on the walls around you. Although seemingly...
Is that not normally what's supposed to happen in real life?
This game had no purpose, as there was no real start, end point, or objective, and eventually the player would get tired and log off. It turns out that the game contained a rat, or a remote access Trojan. This allowed the creator of the game to achieve his real purpose, which was stealing the personal information and webcam access of people who decided to download the game. This led to a slew of people not only losing their bank accounts, but having pictures of themselves randomly emailed to themselves and other people who played the game.
That...
as well. The initial story for lostboy.exe was that it was just a creepy game that had demonic imagery and was possessed by some kind of demon, when in the end it was a way that a real creep got a lot of people's real information. Now, some people have made versions of the game that do not have the rat so that you can experience what the original game was, but never trust any of those because there's no reason to risk it. So the horror of this game is that to even play it, you are putting your own data and information at risk, as well as your very security through things like the camera on your computer. And this all being delivered through demonic imagery and a never-ending maze. Also not great. Berserk is an arcade cabinet that was developed in 1980 by Stern Electronics. The basic structure...
Have I played that? I might have played that, actually. I don't remember, but it sounds familiar.
The game is similar to other arcade games. You play as a guy with a gun who runs through a maze and shoots at the people who come for him, while avoiding the game's final boss, which is a smiling face known as Evil Otto. Now, a lot of you who have heard of Berserk are probably familiar with what makes the game so famous, and that is the 3 deaths surrounding the game itself. On April the 3rd of 1982, a boy named Peter Bukowski died while playing Berserk, or at least that's how the legend goes. Supposedly he was playing the art cabinet and became fully ingrained with it when he suddenly and abruptly died of a heart attack.
Is this what led people to make up that urban legend of Polybius?
Turns out it is true that Peter Bukowski died in an arcade on April the 3rd of 1982, right after he got done playing a game of Berserk. Now, it turns out that the real Peter Bukowski had cardiomyopathy, and his
Shocking.
heart attack was a long time coming, and any kind of excitement could have set it off.
Shocking.
However, this didn't stop the legends that it was the Berserk cabinet specifically that caused him to die. Other tales, like the story of a man who hit a score of 66,600, suddenly dying of a heart attack as well as a third death and second definitive death that did happen involving a Berserk cabinet. While it's not exactly sure
weird.
where it happened, a lot of people say at the same one that Mikowski died in front of, a 17-year-old Edward Clark Jr. got into a fight over whose turn it was to play Berserk next. The person who Edward was
Damn.
fighting was kicked out of the
Gotta
arcade
be
room.
like the seat
And a
of
little while
Polybius.
later, that same night, when Edward went to leave, he was met in the parking lot by the guy he got into a fight with and was stabbed to death. Now, there's several legends regarding arcade cabinets, story of things like Polybius and whatnot.
Hey, there
But
you go.
at least, Berserk has 2 definitive deaths connected to it. And while most just take this to be a fight that led to someone getting murdered and someone who was going to have a heart attack soon anyway, just so happened to having one right after he got done with a game of Berserk, others have said that the flashing lights and the music and perhaps an unseen MK Ultra-esque element of the game causes people to develop health issues and lose their minds in fits of rage.
Yeah, it's
hence the title of the
interesting.
game.
I'd like to do
Berserk.
more research on
Sad
that.
Satan was a game that originally appeared
Aw.
on the YouTube channel
Sad Satan.
Obscure Horror Corner.
Sad
And that
times.
channel was designed to make me mispronounce it. I slur my words so much. Anyway, in the
Me
5-part series he uploaded, the player walks
too.
through these black and white, strangely backlit areas as, just as you're walking, random images of gore and demons and, most particularly disturbing, pedophiles will appear in front of you. This is all done while music is played backwards, intercut with children screaming. The game
Wow,
itself believed
okay.
by many to be a sort of induction into a satanic cult.
That escalated really quickly.
Hence the disturbing images and images of pedophiles or perhaps group members. There is something, admittedly, like as a guy who sees a ton of content that is shocking for shocking's sake, there's something really disturbing about seeing pedophiles intercut with just regular images of children. Like, yeah, sure, I've seen gore and blood and whatnot, but something about like the true evil that's out there really gets to me. Now here's where the conspiracy sets into it. So, Obscure Horror Corner, I can't believe I pronounced that right twice.
Obscure Horror Corner. It's like that 30 Rock joke, the rural juror. They go rural juror.
Said
Love that show.
you shouldn't go looking for the original game files because it contains CP. Like, he was cutting it out in his playthrough, but randomly images of CP would pop up. Which,
I don't doubt it.
as awful as it is to say, makes sense considering that you see gore, you see pedophiles, you would think images like that may show up in this thing. So people began to look into the versions that Obscure Horror Corner had put out, and they couldn't download it because, if I recall correctly, it was something about the URL. The URL was messed up, that it couldn't actually be a link from 4chan,
Still, though.
which is where the game supposedly came from in the first place. So
Oh,
then
really?
another
Shocking.
version came out
Shocking.
that many believe Obscure Horror Corner made as a deflection, because this new version that came out definitely did contain CP, like you'd walk and it just appear in front of you, and people think that the YouTuber did it to prove that he was right about how disturbing this game could be. Really weird and convoluted.
I don't
but
know if I
interesting.
even
and
followed
not
that
enough
train of
people
thought.
talk about it. Like, I've heard of Sad Satan a lot as being this ultra disturbing, video game or whatever. Not a lot of people talk about the fact that the really disturbing parts of it may have just been a cope so that people would believe him. Similar to Sad Satan, don't play this, not
Still
only because
fucked
of
up.
the images you can see,
They're
there are also
fucked up.
several versions floating around that contain a Trojan virus. So leave it alone. Let
Who'd
the
have thought?
YouTubers get the virus and lose all their life savings, because that's what I'm here for. And then finally for this tier, we have Schnell Online.
I've never
Schnell
heard of
Online
that.
comes from a 4chan post that was made in 2018. People on the board began to recognize the game as other screenshots of it had made their way online. From there, a dark rumor
It's
surfaced
weird.
that Schnell Online
That's weird.
was in actuality a middle ground used by pedophiles to trade images of children.
Told you. All these games if they die, I guess this one was made specifically for that. It's how do you even like combat that shit? Like, I don't
This
know.
game, in fact, being one of many that are accessed and kept secret on dark parts of the internet that allow users to speak to each other and communicate freely about their nefarious activities. Now, since then, gameplay has surfaced of Schnell Online, but many accuse that of being fake gameplay that was simply used to match the
Right.
aesthetic of the disturbing game. And even if Schnell Online isn't real or is just some kind of internet creepypasta, it opens the idea that there may be an entire world of game development that only caters to the corrupt.
Yeah.
And if all the dark
No, it's not there may be, there is. There absolutely is. 100 goddamn %.
corners of the internet that we find are just the ones that they don't care enough about to protect, then think of all the evil that we don't know about. And then finally, for our last tier on the iceberg, with an entire layer all
Eric
to itself,
Harris.
we have our last entry, Eric Harris Doom Wads. So as mentioned earlier, Doom was the original popular first-person shooter.
Of course.
And being a game that was played by a lot of people, a lot of unsavory people played it as well. One of the most famous aspects of the original Doom that has kept it alive into the modern age is the modding capabilities of the platform.
Yep.
People can create WADs, which are effectively maps or tailored experiences that they can run on the Doom engine. So basically, anyone who knows how to build a map can build their own map and allow other people to play it. Robert Steinhauser, the perpetrator
Like
of the
a
Hereford
Forge.
School Massacre, created his own Doom WADs and played and shared them online. But perhaps no mod, or game for that matter, has ever been as sinister or infamous as the Doom WADs of Eric Harris. Eric Harris, as mentioned earlier, was one of the Columbine school shooters. Eric, as mentioned earlier in the Columbine Massacre RPG, was
You missed that editing. That's okay.
a big fan
I'll let it slide this time.
of Doom. He would make several different maps and share them online for other people to play. As a matter of fact, the majority of Eric Harris's Doom WADs are still available to download to this day. Now, while that would qualify it for the bottom of the list in its own right, that one of the shooters had created their own series of maps that people still play and pass around even now, the reason it's reserved at the bottom of the iceberg is because of a reference made in the Columbine school shooting report. In the FBI's report, which totaled over 10,000 pages, there's a
God
reference
damn.
made to one of Eric's maps. According to the Columbine report, Eric made one map titled RealDoom.wad, which was a one-for-one recreation of the Columbine High School. And according to the report, Eric populated the map with enemies and time again would practice his massacre of Columbine High. But it seems that right
Pretty
there, at least
fucked
according
up.
to the FBI's report, was a one-for-one recreation of the tragedy that he thought about day after day
I believe
until
it.
he took the lives of so many innocent people.
100%.
And a lot on this iceberg, we've talked about people fantasizing about murder or about doing vile actions. Or there's been things that allow people to carry out vile actions. But here we have something that was solely created to fuel the mind of a killer that eventually did just that.
But it was the D&D that corrupted. Get the fuck out of here. Dude was mentally ill the day he was born, I bet.
And with that, we have the completion of the disturbing and controversial video game Iceberg. While several of the topics we've talked about are, very disturbing or graphic in their own right, and definitely something that you may not
Yeah.
want to dwell on, it's important to emphasize the artistry that video games can represent,
Right.
both as a medium of storytelling, of emotion, of experience.
That's an interesting thing. I mean, there's that big discussion online, like, are video games art? How can they not be? Video games combine narrative, music, aesthetic, like how, and then, just everything as a whole. Like, this game is made up of all of these things that people consider art. So how could the game itself that combines all them not be art? I don't understand that at all. I don't know how people do the mental gymnastics to get over especially that. And I never hear anyone actually talking about that, but it's weird to me.
And everything we're talking about today is as far down the rabbit hole as you can look. It's not hard to pull your head out and see all the beauty that's around it. You have to go looking for the bad stuff,
Sure.
because there's so much good stuff you've got to wade through. But either way, I'm still glad that you heard all of that depressing, probably useless
pretty
knowledge.
Interesting, actually.
Because I think
It's a bunch of
neat,
shit I
and
didn't
think
know
you're
about.
neat for still being here. And I just want to say,
Hey, look at
thank you for watching.
Thank you for making the video, Wendigoon. So please go and watch Wendigoon if anyone, like, I imagine if you're watching this YouTube video, you know who Wendigoon is, but even if you don't for some reason, go watch him. He has tons of amazing, weird, disturbing shit on there. But anyway, I will leave it there. Until next time, take it easy.